In October of 1971, 19-year-old Nancy Elaine Anderson moved to Waikiki, Hawaii from her hometown in Bay City, Michigan. She was excited to be living in the palm tree-filled paradise and was soaking up the island life. Nancy was a wide-eyed optimist with a trusting nature. Some friends said she was a bit too trusting, though. She began working at a nearby McDonald's, found a roommate, and settled into an apartment at 2222 Aloha Drive in Waikiki. She'd just graduated from high school the year before and was eager to see what the world had in store for her. Little did she know the horrors that would soon befall her. On January 7, 1972, just 3 months after her move to Hawaii, Nancy's roommate awoke from a nap and noticed that Nancy's door was ajar and the tap in her bathroom was running. This was odd since Nancy should have been at work by that time. When the roommate went to check on her, she found Nancy's bloody body lying there in the bathroom. She had been brutally stabbed over 60 times. An autopsy later revealed that Nancy had sustained 63 individual stab wounds to her neck, chest, stomach, back, sides, and both arms. She also appeared to have a defensive wound on her thumb. Her official cause of death was a hemorrhage due to a stab wound to the heart. There was no evidence of rape, and tests did not reveal the presence of drugs in her system. Investigators went straight to work trying to identify the killer. They interviewed numerous people, including Nancy's ex-boyfriends, the property manager, and even 2 door-to-door salesmen who'd been there just hours earlier on the very day of the murder trying to sell her silverware. However, after running fingerprints and conducting polygraph tests, all the persons of interest were eventually cleared. Blood evidence was collected from the crime scene. Yet, at that time, only blood typing technology was available. With no new suspects, the case grew cold and would stay that way for nearly 50 years. In 2003, several items of evidence were tested for DNA and ran through the FBI database, yet there was no match. In 2019, Nancy's brother Jack made a heartfelt appeal for justice.
So we're not looking so much for any kind of retribution or anything. We just simply want as much closure as closure can possibly give.
Saying that the family was not looking for any type of retribution, but that they just wanted closure. In 2020, Honolulu detectives enlisted the help of Virginia-based Parabon Nanolabs, who used genetic genealogy and a process called phenotyping to develop a sketch called a snapshot composite of what the suspect may have looked like based on his DNA. In December of 2021, their hard work finally paid off. Honolulu police received a tip based on the sketch linking Tudor Shelia Jr. to Nancy's death. Shelia, who would have been 27 at that time, lived less than 3 miles from Nancy on Aloha Drive during the time of the murder. He was married and working as a graduate assistant at the University of Hawaii. It's unknown if Nancy and Shelia knew each other before the murder. Shelia later moved to Nevada, where he served as Deputy Attorney General and had even ran for the Nevada Supreme Court. Additionally, he was the former president of AGE Corp., a company that served as a front for Nevada brothel owner Joe Conforte. Conforte allegedly controlled organized crime in northwestern Nevada. He was known to have mob ties and political connections across the country. In 1976, he was accused of having his enforcer kill a heavyweight boxer outside of the Mustang Ranch brothel. In 1977, Conforte was convicted of tax evasion and fraud and sentenced to 20 years in prison. While on appeal for tax evasion, he was arrested for attempted bribery of the Lyon Court Nevada District Attorney John Giommi. After police received the tip in 2021 connecting Shelia to Nancy's murder, they were able to track down one of his sons who agreed to provide a DNA sample. The sample was tested against a blood-stained towel found at the crime scene. The results showed that the donor of the sample was the biological son of the killer. On September 6, 2022, the Reno Police Department executed a search warrant allowing them to collect a DNA sample directly from Tudor Shelia himself. 2 days later, on September 8th, Shelia attempted suicide but survived. 4 days later, on September 12th, the Honolulu Police Department officially confirmed that the DNA present on the bloody towel collected at the crime scene did, in fact, belong to Shelia. Finally, on September 14, 2022, 5 decades after the killing, 77-year-old Tudor Shelia Jr. was arrested and charged with the second-degree murder of Nancy Anderson, as well as being a fugitive from another state. He's currently being held without bond at the Washoe County Jail in Reno, awaiting trial. While the motive for Nancy's murder is still unknown, perhaps this will finally give her family the closure they'd been denied for 50 years.
We have a pretrial bail report filed December 6, 2022. The Milwaukee Intake Service Center is unable to make a recommendation at this time, although the defendant participated in the intake interview and did not consent for disclosure of information.
Renee MacRae was born in Inverness, Scotland in February 1940. It was the height of the Second World War, and Inverness was relatively safe from the bombing raids. Renee was a bright and bubbly person who was well liked by those around her and was known for being kind and caring. She never cared much for school and academics, and at the earliest opportunity, left school to find herself a job and venture into the world. In 1960, Renee began working for Boots, a chain of popular chemists, as an assistant in the Inverness city centre. While there, she had met a man 3 years older than herself named Gordon McMurray. Gordon would often be at the chemist, spending his days chatting to Renee. He came from a family of favorable social position and was incredibly wealthy. Renee charmed Gordon with her kind nature and good looks, and they began a whirlwind romance. Gordon took Renee on an adventure as they traveled across Europe, experiencing the life very few could imagine. Gordon and Renee married in 1963. Following a large society wedding, the newlyweds moved to their own family home in Drummond Crescent, Inverness. By 1965, life was getting better for the MacRaes, as Gordon had partnered up with his twin brother Charles and launched a new construction business. It was successful and provided much of the wealth earned by the family. In 1968, Renee and Gordon extended their family when they welcomed their firstborn son, Gordon Jr., into the world. To everyone, the MacRaes looked like the ideal family. But by early 1970, the cracks began to appear. Renee started to withdraw from her old self. She had become withdrawn and often kept to herself. Gordon had taken notice of her changing personality and often questioned her about her sudden behavior. Renee dodged the questions with ease. Unbeknownst to those around her, Renee had begun an affair. In 1973, their marriage seemed to be on the mend when the couple welcomed a second son named Andrew. In time, though, their interest in each soon waned. Soon, Renee wanted to move out. She was tired of pretending they had a perfect marriage. Gordon agreed to this and continued to support her financially. They were cordial with each other, and by 1974, Renee moved into a bungalow bought for her by Gordon. She was also allowed to take the children with her, something Gordon didn't protest. They never formally divorced and remained legally married. In 1976, Gordon told Renee he'd started a relationship with his former secretary, Vivian. The couple's relationship continued to progress as it always had, until tragedy struck. On the morning of November 12, 1976, 36-year-old Renee woke up to her usual routine. She woke the boys and prepared them for their day before serving breakfast. Afterwards, she dressed herself before leaving to drop off 9-year-old Gordon Jr. at school. Andrew, aged 3, went along with Renee for the day. Near midday, Renee met her 2 friends, Valerie Stevenson and Margaret Ross, for coffee. Afterwards, she dropped off Margaret back at the bungalow, as Margaret was also Renee's housekeeper. At around 5 p.m., she visited her estranged husband Gordon at his construction office, where she was going to drop off Gordon Jr. to spend the weekend with his father. She promised to fetch him early Monday in time for school. It was growing stormy as clouds gathered ominously in the sky outside. Renee took Andrew along as she told her husband Gordon she was going to pay a visit to her sister, Morag Govans. It was much later that evening that several reports of billowing smoke along the A9 were reported to police in Inverness. Upon arrival, police discovered a blue BMW had been set alight in a lay-by along the road. When the fire was put out, they were able to read the license plates and trace the vehicle back to Gordon MacRae. There was not much physical evidence, as there were no bodies or personal items found in the car. All they discovered was a blood-stained rug in the boot. Police contacted Gordon, who said his wife Renee owned the car and had been on her way to visit her sister Morag. When they contacted Morag, police were perplexed to discover that Renee had lied when she said she was on her way to visit her sister. Police decided they needed to contact Renee regarding what had happened to her car. With assistance from the RAF, an infrared search of the area was conducted to find Renee and Andrew. But the weekend passed and still there was no sign. Gordon found this behavior unusual for Renee, as she was not one to intentionally create panic for her family. By November 19, 1976, police held a press conference. Police declared that the case of Renee and Andrew MacRae was now being investigated as one of homicide. This announcement came after conducting interviews with both Gordon MacRae and Valerie Stevenson. Police naturally looked into Gordon as a suspect, as cases like this involved a spurned or jilted partner. Gordon explained his entire workday to officers and was able to provide a solid alibi for his whereabouts. He'd also explained the relationship he and Renee shared and admitted he was aware she had been having an affair, but did not know who the person was. He too had by then moved on with his own life. After the interview with Gordon, Valerie's statement was about to take the investigation into another gear. She told police officers that she was aware that Renee had been having an affair for a number of years. She also confessed to knowing Renee's plan to meet her lover over the weekend and used her sister Morag as a cover-up. Then she dropped a bombshell. Andrew was not the biological son of Gordon, but rather a product of the affair Renee had been conducting over the years. When asked about who had been Renee's lover, Valerie said it had been 34-year-old William Bill McDowell all along. Bill was no stranger to the MacRae household. He was an accountant and served as a board member for Gordon's construction company. He and Renee had begun their affair back in 1971. Bill was a married man and had often promised Renee that he was going to leave his wife so they could both start a new life together. According to Valerie, Renee told her that Bill was planning on taking a job with Texaco and that they would both go on to live together on the Shetland Islands. Police now knew the name of Renee's lover and had made sure to bring him in for questioning. During his interview, Bill admitted to being Andrew's biological father. He also said that he did tell Renee that he was considering leaving his wife Rosemary so that they could live a life together. However, he admitted that on the night of Renee's disappearance, he did make plans to spend the weekend with her and their son, but later changed his mind and stayed home with his wife. Rosemary confirmed his alibi to police. When police stated that they believed Renee may have come to harm, Bill said Renee was okay because over the weekend he received multiple coded calls. It was their way of communicating since their affair was dangerous to conduct so openly. He, however, contradicted Valerie's statement and denied that he had ever made plans to leave his wife and start a new one with Renee. He said that the story was a complete fabrication. Police eventually let him go and he'd been dismissed from Gordon's company as well. The leads were drying up, but police still needed to conduct tests on the evidence found at the scene. They were able to discover that the small sample of blood did in fact match Renee and Andrew's blood type. Appeals were made to any witnesses to come forward with information. One did, and said he had seen a man carrying what looked like a sheep on the night of the incident. However, he could not describe him. It was weeks later when Inverness police received a surprise visit from Bill, who said he wanted to make a voluntary statement that may have a significant impact on the case. It was not to be, as before Bill could begin his sentence, his wife rushed in and dragged him out of the room. She then accused investigators of harassing them and asked them to leave their family alone. Over the next 8 weeks, over 200 volunteers helped 100 police search an area covering 100 square miles. An RAF Canberra spy plane made sweeps of the moors with equipment capable of detecting disturbed earth, but it seemed as if they'd fallen off the face of the earth. With winter fast approaching and conditions becoming dangerous, the search was abandoned until the next summer in 1977. Investigators, though, continued to gather thousands of witness statements, hoping to find a clue that could lead them to a suspect. In the meantime, Bill and his wife Rosemary had continued to live under a cloud of suspicion and eventually moved to England when the whispers began to destroy their peaceful family life. Bill had always remained a person of interest, but with the lack of bodies, investigators had nothing more than circumstantial evidence against him. Searches of a quarry in Dalmagary were abandoned due to a lack of finances, with a quarry in Lynette and a fly-tipping hotspot near Culloden Moor being searched without yielding results. By the end of the first year, the investigation was starting to get scaled back, with active officers dropping from 100 to just 10. Throughout the years, there were periods of intense interest, including an interview with Bill and Rosemary being conducted in 1986. Renee's family mourned her loss, but the world seemed to have forgotten their pain. Then, in 2004, interest was renewed in the case after an episode of Unsolved covered Renee and Andrew MacRae's disappearance. Promises of funding from those interested in solving the case prompted the cold case to be reopened. Investigators identified the Dalmagary quarry as a potential hiding place for the bodies. After draining and excavating the area, bones were discovered, but tests proved they belonged to animals. Interest dwindled again, but in 2006, police filed yet another report of a possible suspect. The person had never been named, as prosecutors believed that there was insufficient evidence to take action. However, in 2017, the investigation was reopened, and police records were gathered into hefty logbooks for detectives to examine. In October 2018, on what would have been Andrew's 45th birthday, police made an appeal for help in solving the case by releasing images of the pram Andrew was normally pushed in by his mother. Then, in November 2019, at age 80, Bill McDowell was arrested for the double murder of Renee and Andrew MacRae, 43 years after they disappeared without a trace. Evidence gathered from the original investigation with witness statements were enough to allow for Bill McDowell to be tried in court. Advocate Deputy Alex Prentice QC said the age of the case did not represent significant challenges, but the Crown was ready for trial. In September 2022, the highly anticipated trial began in earnest as statements from witnesses were read out and new clues were presented to the court. Back and forth arguments between the defense and prosecution included Bill's denial of killing Renee and Andrew, and accusations against Gordon claiming he was responsible for their deaths. His wife Rosemary had also commented that given his health, he was a dead man walking. But it was Prentice's explanation of how Bill was the one with everything to lose had the truth come out that convinced the jury of Bill's guilt. Prentice said that Bill was the only man with a motive for killing the pair, as his concern grew that news of his affair would be revealed. Life for Bill McDowell would change dramatically if it all came out in the open. He would lose his job, his family, and his home, said Prentice. Although the bodies of Renee and Andrew have still not been found, the circumstantial evidence was strong enough for a jury to find Bill McDowell guilty of the double murder of Renee and Andrew. Following the announcement of the verdict, Inverness High Court Judge Lord Armstrong sentenced Bill to life in prison with a recommendation of 30 years minimum. Bill McDowell will die in prison. For Renee's sister Morag, she just wants her sister and nephew returned to them so they can be buried with dignity. 31-year-old Jamie Lynette Yazzie was born on September 13, 1987, on the Navajo Nation Reservation in Arizona. Jamie was a hardworking mother of 3 boys. She worked as a nursing assistant at a healthcare facility in Pinnan. Everyone who knew her said she was dedicated, enjoyed what she did, and was reliable. Mary Lynn James, Jamie's maternal aunt, described her as happy-go-lucky, always smiling, laughing, and joking. Whoever she met, they warmed up to her so quickly. The next day, they're like best friends. She was really kind and a good mother, said Mary Lynn. But life wasn't always easy for Jamie. Family members were concerned about Jamie following the violent death of her cousin, Kevin Hanley, back in 2017. It affected Jamie as she was at the grocery store when the incident took place and followed the ambulance to the hospital where he was later pronounced dead. Jamie, like the rest of her family, took his death badly, as they still don't know who was responsible for his death. To ease the pain, Jamie turned to alcohol, but her aunt Mary Leen maintained that Jamie was still a good person despite her drinking problem. She ended up taking that really hard, and she ended up turning to drinking as a coping mechanism. She still held on to her job though. "That's one thing I would tell her. Hang on to your job. Get your kids back," said Mary Leen. It was during this time that Jamie met 27-year-old Trey C. James. They both worked in the same circle of friends and were introduced to each other by co-workers. Jamie and Trey eventually moved in together in a house in Pinnan. Trey's grandmother had also moved in with them. However, the relationship was toxic. Co-workers began to notice a change in Jamie. Trey was beginning to take over her life and control her finances. Mary Leen said the family were never formally introduced to Trey. It was customary in the Navajo tradition to meet the family and the future in-laws. All Mary Leen knew about Trey was through conversations with Jamie. Jamie would reassure her that Trey helped her and made sure she was up in the morning and ready for work. For Mary Leen, she believed Trey only did this because Jamie was the sole source of income in their household. One of the last conversations between both women was about Jamie going back to school and perhaps going on to become a registered nurse. She'd last spoken to Jamie on June 26, 2019. But on June 30th, 2019, everything changed. Jamie had suddenly disappeared and lost all contact with her family. People started to notice her lack of communication, as she was a well-known figure in the community. Her mother, Ethelene Denny, and an unnamed co-worker who spotted Jamie's car about a mile from the health center reported her missing 5 days later on July 5th, 2019. Mary Leen had tried messaging Jamie and had driven up to Pinnan to visit with the family. When she got there, though, she knew something was wrong. "She was always waiting for us to come home. So when I got home, I should have known because everything just seemed a little more gray and gloomier. You could just feel something was wrong," she said. According to records, Jamie had spent her last night in the company of her brother and his girlfriend, both of whom have not been named, and her boyfriend, Trey C. James. The group had been drinking heavily, and Jamie and Trey were allegedly arguing over infidelity issues within their relationship. As the couple's argument grew intense, both Jamie's brother and his girlfriend left their home in the early hours of the morning. This was the last time anyone would see Jamie. In the days following the disappearance of Jamie, Trey had decided to camp out at his aunt's house as a consented search was carried out by police at the home he shared with Jamie. During the search, investigators found blood, which was later proven to be Jamie's after her parents provided DNA samples, a spent 9mm casing, a spent .22 caliber casing, a white substance that was said to be a cleaning agent, and a stained and partially burnt mattress. Without a body, though, nothing yet could be proven. Investigators began investigating the relationship between Jamie and Trey. Both Jamie and Trey were both unfaithful to one another, with reports suggesting that Jamie was still legally married to another man while living with Trey. The infidelity accusations were looked into further after Trey's father said that Trey admitted to messing up with Jamie and told him that she too was messing around with other men. His father further stated that Trey was probably responsible for Jamie's disappearance. More interviews were conducted with family members and friends of both Jamie and Trey. According to Trey's sister, Jamie had messaged her on Facebook claiming Trey had threatened her with a pistol and then fired off 2 rounds before chasing her back into the house. She further stated that she had once told Jamie not to date her brother. Trey's family reported that in the days following Jamie's disappearance, he'd started acting paranoid, aggressive, and was in possession of a handgun. His aunt and sister alleged the relationship was abusive, and Trey often behaved violently toward Jamie. A co-worker backed up this claim by adding that a year prior to her disappearance, Jamie had sent her a photo of the black eye Trey had given her during a heated argument. Jamie's brother, who has not yet been named, provided a vital clue to the investigators. In interviews, he said that on the night Jamie was last seen, they had in fact been drinking with the couple and that an argument had started. During the night, Trey allegedly showed Jamie's brother a 9mm handgun he received for his birthday. What he told police seemed to fit their theory that Trey gunned down Jamie. However, this was all circumstantial evidence. Without a body, nothing could be proven despite their suspicions. And so, almost 2.5 years later, investigators finally got a break. For Jamie's family, the discovery was bittersweet. For investigators, it was a chance to get to the bottom of the case. Partial skeletal remains were found, along with a blue tarpon rope, a Pendleton-style blanket, and other materials, 7 miles from where Jamie had gone missing in the Hopi Nation reservation. Using dental records and a DNA profile created by her parents' DNA samples, the remains were identified as Jamie Yazzie. Furthermore, her cause of death was determined to be a single gunshot wound to her head. Trey was interviewed on January 26, 2022 by investigators, and he said he had never been violent with Jamie. He'd also insisted that Jamie had left with her brother and his girlfriend, and that was the last time he'd seen her. A background look in Trey's life, though, painted a different picture of a man who was proving to be a monster. Several partners of Trey's from before and after his relationship with Jamie came forward to investigators and revealed the violent nature of Trey. He had assaulted several women, beaten and strangled them during the course of their relationships. He was prone to fits of anger and often threatened with harm if any of them crossed him. One woman who identified herself as his partner by her initials LS alleged that she was strangled by Trey during their relationship, and he'd even gone as far as to kidnap her to keep her from leaving. With the investigation completed and the identification of Jamie's remains, police arrested Trey in connection with Jamie's death. On August 4, 2022, he made his first court appearance. He appeared in court on August 9, 2022 for a detention hearing. Here, statements were made by other victims to his crimes. He was eventually charged with the murder of Jamie Yazzie. His trial began in Phoenix, Arizona on October 4, 2022, and remains ongoing. For Jamie's family, it was one step closer to bringing her home. Although her body has not yet been released to the family due to the ongoing trial, they hope that one day soon they can put her to rest. Jamie's aunt Marilyn said, "It's starting our healing process." To know Alfred Chad McMurray was to love him, said everyone close to the 31-year-old Greensboro native. After a few run-ins with police for drug-related incidents, he decided to make a fresh start and relocated to South Florida. Better known as Chad to everyone, he dedicated himself to cleaning up his life and was very involved with Narcotics Anonymous following his recovery from drug abuse. The 6'3" aspiring chef was passionate about cooking and was on his way to completing a culinary degree at Le Cordon Bleu in Miramar. His mother, June McMurray, said he was a guy with a big laugh and infectious smile. From a little kid, he never met a stranger. Everybody was his friend, said June. Chad had been in a same-sex relationship with his partner, Shannon Pruitt, for a year. They had both moved in and lived together in a home in Oakland Park. Their little slice of happiness was shattered on the night of August 30th, 2010. Shannon had been away on a business trip in St. Louis. He recalled talking to Chad on the phone and asking him what he was doing. Chad had said he was watching TV before going to have dinner. Shannon agreed to talk after dinner, but the calls went unanswered. A mutual friend stopped by to check up on Chad and the home they both shared. He was found shot to death inside their home. The Broward Sheriff's Office were called to the scene, and investigators soon discovered a very gruesome scene. Chad had been shot execution-style in the back of the head. His hands were bound by rope behind his back. Clues at the scene were limited, but his 2006 silver Toyota Tacoma and personal computer were missing. Investigators classified it as a robbery gone wrong. Police also suspected that there may have been more than one person involved because Chad was a big guy. It was also suspected that he may have known at least one of the persons involved because there was no forced entry. His vehicle was located the next day, doused with bleach inside and out, at a Lauderhill apartment complex, but the vehicle was wiped down, erasing all traces of evidence. Despite the time taken to clean up the crime, no witnesses came forward regarding what had been seen on the night Chad was murdered. The DNA recovered from Chad's fingernails failed to find a match on any databases. Despite numerous interviews and evidence gathering, detectives were unable to pinpoint a clear suspect. The case started to grow cold, leaving those closest to Chad as victims of the crime. For Chad's loved ones, it was a bitter pill to swallow. His father, George McMurray, recalled the night he received the devastating call. The phone call itself was hard, but the hardest thing I ever did was tell my wife that our son was dead.
It was a phone call. It just didn't seem real. I think the hardest thing that I ever done was telling her that our son is dead.
I think about that every day of my life, he said. For Shannon, he had lost the love of his life. To know Chad was to love Chad. He was full of life and he loved everyone he encountered. So for people to know there's people out there who would have done something like this to him is not comprehensible, he said. Years would pass before new information surfaced, leading investigators to find a possible suspect. In May 2022, investigators reopened the case and finally tracked 52-year-old Aaron Michael Dobbins. From the initial investigation, police did not rule out robbery as a motive, or that Chad's old life had somehow caught up with them in the end, but they were unable to find any association between Aaron and Chad until further investigations were done. Prior to meeting Shannon, Chad had dabbled in online dating and met a man by the name of John Navarro. Navarro was a gay pornography model and was known as Mr. Muscle Stud online. He also performed paid massages via online services. According to reports, Navarro and Chad had met about 3 times. Navarro became the link between Aaron and Chad. Police were able to contact Navarro and he revealed to them his relationship with Aaron. Aaron and Navarro had met online on the dating site called Big Muscle and soon began a relationship that lasted 5 years. Both men had been very interested in the online gay pornography scene. Aaron had lived in the Oakland Park area between 2010 and 2015, and he and Navarro had also been roommates at one point. During the interview, police let slip to Navarro that Aaron's DNA had been found under Chad's fingernails. Stumped, Navarro couldn't explain how Aaron's DNA came to be found under Chad's fingernails. He did, however, allege that he and Aaron and Chad had been involved in an act of group sex. Investigators also discovered that Navarro had made multiple calls to Chad on the night of the murder, but he was never really questioned about these as they didn't particularly raise any red flags. Navarro then mentioned to police that Aaron was very jealous in their relationship. With this information, BSO investigators traveled to Pasco County to interview Aaron. He told detectives a similar story to how he had met Navarro on the dating site and had fallen in love because it was a special thing. Aaron said that problems soon arose in the relationship because he was just coming out of the closet, whereas Navarro had been out for years. Aaron reportedly told investigators that Navarro's penchant for hardcore sexual activities bothered him. He also denied having been involved in group sex with Chad, but later told detectives he wanted to err on the side of caution and changed his story to maybe he had relations with him. Aaron then implied that the DNA found under Chad's fingernails was because Chad had beaten him up, but denied having gone to Chad's house. He further explained that he had never owned a gun due to past anger issues. Aaron, though, did not refute the evidence of his DNA being found under Chad's fingernails. After a search warrant for his DNA was presented to Aaron, he volunteered a DNA sample that proved a perfect match from that found at the crime scene. He told investigators, "You're right. If my DNA was there, then I was there, but I don't remember anything." Aaron was arrested in Hillsborough County on September 22, 2022, and held without bond at the Broward Main Jail. He now faces a charge of first-degree murder and is currently awaiting trial as investigations continue. It was a tragic blow for the family of 18-year-old Devyn Gibson when his lifeless body was found on September 20th, 2015. He was found at around 1 a.m. in the area of Ledgerslede and Sibley Street in Longview Central, Texas. Devyn had been shot 8 times, according to an autopsy report. Investigators ruled the crime as part of the ongoing gang-related murders in the area. Devyn's father, Demetrice Watson, said it was all wrong, that his son had plans for the future. Devyn, he said, was more advanced than many kids his age and had dreams of following in his brother's footsteps. He wanted to go to Tyler to join his brother at Texas College and start playing college football at a higher level. The average teenager wants to sleep all day and play video games all day, but Devyn wants to get up and go to work, 6 or 7 in the morning, whatever time they want him there, said his father. Devyn had just received his GED and was working full-time at Sonic. He knew the importance of education and structure. Dimitrice said he was a good boy, worked hard, and earned his own money. He suspected that Devyn was the victim of a robbery because he was well-dressed and had been carrying around money he'd earned from his job. Gangbangers don't have these types of plans. Gangbangers have the plans of hell or jail. My son had plans to be somebody. He wanted to go to college, he said. For 7 years, the trail went cold until new evidence surfaced in the ongoing investigation. Police issued a warrant of arrest for murder, and on October 6, 2022, 25-year-old Ceylan Bridges was arrested without incident. Ceylan was booked into Greig County Jail. There's still no clear motive as to why Ceylan killed Devyn, and the investigation remains ongoing. Authorities have not yet revealed what evidence led to Ceylan's arrest. Ceylan would have been the same age as Devyn when the shooting occurred. On July 15, 1996, the nude and badly brutalized body of 32-year-old Michelle Marie Veal was discovered by a survey crew along Stony Point Road in unincorporated Sonoma County, California. The body had been unceremoniously dumped in brush next to a barbed wire fence. Michelle Veal of Union City, California, was the loving mother of 3 girls, aged 7, 8, and 10. Her body was discovered on her youngest daughter's 7th birthday. She was described as a vibrant, magnetic, and very popular woman, beloved by both friends and family alike. An autopsy revealed that Michelle had been beaten to death and suffered multiple skull fractures and a broken neck. It appeared that Michelle had put up a fierce fight for her life, but was no match for this sadistic predator. Police meticulously collected evidence from the scene, including scrapings from underneath Michelle's fingernails. A weapon was never recovered. Despite a thorough investigation, with little evidence to go on, eventually the killer's trail went cold. For the next 25 years, Michelle's case sat dormant. Then in 2021, Detective Adrian Anea joined the Violent Crimes Investigation Team. He began digging through the old case files and came across a box marked Michelle Veal. He decided to explore further to see if anything new could be gleaned from the half-a-century-old evidence. That's when he came across the fingernail scrapings taken from the victim 25 years earlier. In April 2021, Detective Anea decided to send the evidence to a private lab called the Serological Research Institute, or SERI. The sample was minute, but it was all they had to go on. If they move forward with the testing, this could potentially be their last shot.
Courage of Michelle, she gave us clues to help solve her murder and tell her story. I began reviewing this cold case file.
Thankfully, their gamble paid off. In January of 2022, they finally hit a match in the FBI's CODES database. The DNA was linked back to a man named Jack Alexander Boken. Boken's name had come up earlier in the investigation, but at the time, detectives could find no evidence to link him to Michelle's murder. It's unknown how the two crossed paths. Boken, it turns out, had a disturbing past. Growing up, it was clear that he was highly intelligent. He excelled in math and sciences and wanted to be an astrophysicist when he grew up. He was a whiz at chess as well as a piano prodigy. He resented his parents for being simple-minded in his eyes, refusing to call them mom and dad, instead referring to them as mother and father. He blamed them for most of his problems growing up. He was an odd boy without many friends, but there was something much more sinister about the child prodigy than just his aloofness. At age 7, little Jack stole his father's gun and brought it to school. At age 9, he began stealing bikes from a park near his home to sell for parts. And by age 10, he had become a full-blown sexual predator. That was when he began raping his 3-year-old cousin. She was later quoted as saying, "Even at that young age, Jack was already so practiced in stealth that the abuse was never suspected." In the years that followed, not even my father, who was a San Francisco police inspector on the sex crimes detail, sensed that anything was wrong. In 1997, just a year after Michelle Veal's murder, Boken had been arrested for a separate crime and charged with kidnapping with intent to commit rape, rape by force or fear, rape of a victim incapable of consent, attempted murder, and other crimes. He had been out on parole at the time for 3 other rape charges. He was convicted and sentenced to serve 231 years in prison. In that case, Boken kidnapped a 19-year-old, who he then bound, beat, and raped for 5 hours straight before bashing her skull in with a hammer and tossing her into the San Francisco Bay. She somehow miraculously survived. In addition to being a serial rapist, investigators now suspect that Boken may have been a serial killer as well, and could be responsible for a string of murders that took place in the Bay Area from the 1970s through the 1990s, dubbed the Hitchhiker Murders. There were at least 7 victims connected to the Hitchhiker Murders, but police believe there are likely more. All of the victims in those murders were found nude in rural areas near steep embankments or in creek beds near roads. They were also all known to hitchhike, which was a popular way to get around in those times. While serving out his 231-year sentence, 78-year-old Jack Boken died in the California Department of Corrections medical facility just 1 month before charges could be brought against him for the murder of Michelle Veal. It was a bittersweet ending for both the family and detectives. The family was obviously relieved, and it's just a prime example of how we don't forget about the victims. Every family deserves answers, and this is the case, Sergeant Juan Valencia said. Veal's family said in a statement, "Though she's been gone, memories of her beautiful smile, impeccable style, generous spirit, and enthusiasm for life live on forever in the hearts of the many people whose lives she touched." Adding, "Our dear Michelle was a mom to 3 young girls who were raised in the care of her incredible mother, as well as by her loving sister. There were struggles made her particularly vulnerable at times. Michelle's strength is what kept her persevering through many adversities to do her best for those she loved. Michelle's tenacious spirit lives on in her daughters, who are all leading happy, healthy lives today, and raising their children to remember her as the beautiful grandmother whom we all wish they could have met." On June 17, 1994, the body of Gloria Hansell was found by a family member at her home in the 3900 block of Buchanan Street in Gary, Indiana. The 69-year-old widow was a vulnerable woman in poor health. She lived alone and was reliant upon an oxygen tank. Initially, it was believed that Gloria died from natural causes. Shockingly, however, funeral home employees later found an electrical cord from a box fan wrapped tightly around her neck. The workers immediately notified authorities, and a homicide investigation was then launched. An autopsy would later find that in addition to being viciously strangled to death with the electrical cord from the fan box, Gloria had also been sexually assaulted before her death. Evidence was collected from the scene, including DNA, and a post-mortem rape kit was performed. Yet, with no other evidence to go on, detectives were at a loss and the case froze over, not to be thawed out until decades later. In 2020, the FBI decided to re-examine some of the evidence in the case, including DNA found on the electrical cord used to strangle her and DNA gathered from the rape kit. They then sent the samples to Lowell Regional Laboratory for further testing on the unknown suspect's DNA that had been collected from Gloria's body. The electrical cord provided no results, but the rape kit eventually led to a match. In 2022, Gerald Lynn Smith, a 60-year-old man from Kentucky, was charged by Lake County prosecutors in Indiana for the 1994 murder of Gloria Hansell. Additionally, he's charged with murder while committing a rape. the FBI's Gang Response Team, or GRIT, was able to place Smith in the area of Gary, Indiana around the time of the murder. He was also known to Gloria Hansell. According to the FBI, a witness reported Smith, who was 32 years old at the time of the murder, had gone to Hansell's house on at least 2 occasions in the weeks before her murder and said he had just moved back into the area from out of state. The witness stated that on one occasion, Smith asked Hansell if he could cut her grass for money, but she declined his offer, the FBI said. The witness stated on another occasion, Hansell said Smith made an unwanted advance towards her inside her house that made her uncomfortable when he tried to kiss her neck. At some point, Hansell allegedly told a relative that Smith had leaned her back on a rocking chair and placed his hands or head by her neck. Hansell, who had been widowed for about 2 years at that point, was unnerved by this interaction with Smith. Apparently, in the initial stages of the investigation, Smith's fingerprints were compared to latent prints found on a soda can and credit card found at the crime scene, yet his prints were not a match. It's been reported that in a 2020 interview with the FBI at a Madisonville, Kentucky rehabilitation center, Smith initially denied ever knowing Hansell. He did, however, later admit to knowing her, yet continued to deny knowing where she lived. Smith has since obtained a lawyer and has not made any further statements. He's not yet entered a plea.
Right, and these documents show the 4 counts that LaToya Clinkscale faces, including premeditated first-degree murder. MCSO tells me they helped with his extradition from California back to Phoenix, where he remains behind bars.
42-year-old U.S. Air Force veteran Shelia Jones was known affectionately by her friends and family as Stevie. Just days after Christmas 2005, Stevie's co-worker and good friend, Danita Green, went to visit her friend at her home at 19th and Glendale Avenues in Phoenix, Arizona. Upon entering the home, she noticed what looked like a person bent over on the couch. It was almost as if they were looking for or reaching for something underneath the couch. Yet something was odd. There was no movement, just a still silhouette of a person. There were no lights on inside the home, so Danita moved closer to try to get a better look. That's when she noticed Stevie's lifeless hands tied behind her back. Horrified, Danita immediately called the authorities after she realized that her dear friend was dead.
They went through everything. They found both her safes. The drawers were pulled out.
When investigators arrived, the scene was in total disarray. The house had been ransacked, all the drawers had been pulled out, and both of Stevie's safes had been emptied.
He fought. He had to overpower her in order to do what he was able to do to her.
Detectives theorized that what had started as a burglary soon escalated and turned deadly. It appeared that Stevie had fought with her attacker. Investigators collected all the evidence they could from the scene, but despite an intense investigation, Stevie's case grew cold for the next 17 years. Recently, investigators decided to take another look at the case and were able to announce the arrest of LaToya Clinkscale for the 2005 murder of Shelia Stevie Jones. It's still unknown what eventually linked Clinkscale to the crime, but it's believed that a DNA sample was used to identify him. Clinkscale had been extradited to Phoenix from a prison in Wasco, California, where he was serving time for another crime. During the research for this story, we were able to find an arrest for LaToya Clinkscale in 2018 for an armed robbery incident at Liberty Tax Services in Barstow, California. During that incident, Clinkscale apparently entered the business around 8 p.m. brandishing a handgun. He demanded money and warned them if anyone moved, he'd shoot them. The employees complied and turned over approximately $1,200 in cash. He then fled on foot. Officers eventually caught up to him and identified him by his clothing and a chipped front tooth. Employees from Liberty Tax then confirmed that he was, in fact, the robber. At the time of his arrest, officers recovered the stolen $1,200 from his person. When they ran his name through the system, they also discovered that he was on active parole for an earlier crime. Clinkscale was then booked at the Barstow jail for robbery, felon in possession of ammo, felon in possession of a weapon, and a parole violation. Upon searching the dirt area that Clinkscale fled to, officers recovered a small silver handgun, a sweatshirt, and beanies. After reviewing the surveillance cameras showing the crime taking place, officers were able to compare those items to the one on the film, confirming that Clinkscale was, indeed, their man. When Danita Green was made aware of the arrest by a local news station and shown Clinkscale's picture, she said she had never seen him before. She believes the killing was random. She added, "He looks like somebody that if he ever approached her, that he was down and out on his luck or whatever, she wouldn't hesitate to assist." When asked what Danita misses most about her friend Stevie, she said that, "You could hear her smile when she talked to you. She had a heart of gold. She was a beautiful person."
Mesa police say 65-year-old Willie Butler was murdered at his home in 2009. And for 13 years, officers have searched for his killer.
On January 10, 2009, La Mesa native Willie Butler was found beaten to death in his own home. His sister Dorothy had become concerned when she'd not heard from or seen Willie in a couple of days. She decided to go pay him a visit at his La Mesa, Texas home along with her grandsons. When they arrived at the house in the 1300 block of Southeast Canyon Street, they knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The front door was locked, and when no one came to the door, Dorothy's two grandsons broke a window to get in. They just came out screaming and fell into the yard. "I knew then that something was wrong," Dorothy said. The boys had found a bloodied and battered Willie lying face down on the ground. Police later confirmed that he'd been beaten to death. However, no weapon was ever mentioned. The murder shocked the tight-knit community of La Mesa, who had not had a homicide in 2 years prior to Willie's murder. Investigators wasted no time trying to piece together the puzzle of who killed Willie. Willie, an avid golfer and a family man who was beloved in the community. Everyone generally liked him, and he had no known enemies. Even the La Mesa mayor, Josh Stevens, lamented about his friendship with Willie, saying, "I played golf with him. When you got teamed up with him in a tournament or a scramble, you knew you were going to have a good afternoon. An infectious smile, good laugh." Stevens said he had just recently been elected to city council in 2009 when he learned about Butler's death. "It was just heartbreak. When something like that happens in a city of our size, it really takes a hit at another level. We all know each other well," Stevens said. Mayor Pro Tem and District 3 City Councilwoman Gloria Rodriguez said she was born and raised in La Mesa and also knew Butler, saying in an interview, "He was a very well-liked, very respectable, very kind person. We lost a great individual." Truly, no one had a bad word to say about Willie. Sadly, with no leads and no clear motive as to why someone would kill a nice old man in his own home, the case grew cold. Yet despite this, neither detectives nor Willie's family ever gave up. They continued to search diligently to find Willie's killer for the next 13 years. Then in 2022, according to La Mesa Police Chief Josh Peterson, a lieutenant for the La Mesa Police Department was going through the old case files and reviewing the notes of a former captain who had worked on the case. He came across a report which mentioned a name. He continued to follow the lead, which ended up breaking the case wide open. With assistance from the Texas Rangers Unsolved Crimes Investigative Program, further investigation led to more information and eventually to a suspect. An arrest warrant charging Tommy Joe Manuel Jr., age 49, with murder was issued in October 2022. Manuel was locked up on drug charges in the Dawson County Detention Center when Police Chief Josh Peterson served him with a murder warrant on October 19, 2022, for the slaying of 65-year-old Willie Butler. He was shocked, but just in general denial over the whole thing, Peterson said. Chief Peterson would not go into further detail about the ongoing homicide investigation or elaborate on a possible motive for the crime. Peterson did say that the family was very surprised by the arrest after 13 long years. He stated, "They were in shock. I believe they had, the best way I can describe it, maybe they had lost hope after all this time, but they were very grateful that we were able to bring them closure that they'd wanted for so long." 51-year-old Sandra Garcia had no known relatives and a few friends. She lived alone in her southwest Oklahoma home and led a quiet life, a private woman who many described as willing to help anyone in need. When she failed to turn up at the local convenience store where she'd worked, her co-workers grew concerned and requested a welfare check. On September 30th, 2003, police discovered Sandra's lifeless body on the floor of her home. There was dried blood on her face, and she'd been beaten and stabbed several times. Investigators were able to recover DNA and fingerprints, but said it could have been anyone's, as there seemed to be no reason as to why Sandra had been killed. Her murder baffled the few people who knew her, as she had no known enemies. There was no sign of a robbery or indication of assault, just a senseless killing. Melissa Woods, who was Sandra's manager at the convenience store and had grown close to the older woman, said she hoped her killer would be found and justice would be served. "Once she became your friend, she was truly your friend. She'd give you the shirt off her back," she told local news station K4.
She was truly your friend, would give you the shirt off her back.
Hoping to gather some leads and clues, the Oklahoma City Police Department posted their crime report on their Facebook page, but no one had come forward, no family or tipsters. A search through obituary records in the Oklahoma Historical Society done by the K4 team yielded nothing more than a notice obituary. All it read was Sandra's name, age, date of death, and the vigil time set for October 6, 2003 at 8 p.m. Director of Victim Services for Survivors of Homicide Incorporated, Jessica Pisano, said she was hit hard by Sandra's lack of relations and her isolation. "One of the things that really hit me hard on top of not really having friends or family to reach out to is I can't find a picture of her anywhere," she said.
Well, a lot of times it allows them to start grieving. A lot of times when these cases are not solved for a period of time, families can't even grieve properly.
Sandra's murder case grew cold until 2017, when the OKCPD's Cold Case Unit and the Oklahoma County DA's office reviewed the case. DNA advancements allowed for further testing to be done on the DNA and fingerprints left behind at the scene. This led investigators to two men, Andrew Lewis Canaday and David Yanes, whose fingerprints were positively matched through the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation database. Investigators discovered that David Yanes had committed suicide in Dallas, Texas in September 2004. He was a known career criminal. Andrew Canaday, though, was incarcerated at the Just Done Correctional Facility in Taft, Oklahoma for another criminal felony from 2018. Canaday had a long history of being in and out of the courtroom for several charges, including a DUI, driving with a suspended license, obstructing an officer, and possession of CDS, said Gary Knight of the OKCPD. After tracking him down, a detective from the OKCPD and an investigator from the DA's office went over to interview Canaday on May 10, 2022. It was a long shot, but following the interview with Canaday, investigators had enough information to press charges against him. According to Knight, Yanes apparently committed the murder, and Canaday was his accomplice in the crime. On August 11, 2022, Canaday was charged with first-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter in relation to the death of Sandra Garcia. He remains behind bars awaiting trial for the murder. The OKCPD has officially closed the case. Sandra's case was the third cold case solved this year for the department. Jessica Pisano said that the solving of cases like that of Sandra's can be tough on everyone left behind. You have the right to feel devastated. You have the right to be angry. You have the right to want these answers. You are not alone in this. But never give up hope, because it only takes one person or evidence that could solve the case, she said. Many of the loved ones of victims whose cases have gone cold say not knowing is the hardest part. The living nightmare of not just having any answers is unbearable. Hopefully, finally learning who killed their loved one will give these families some sense of solace, knowing that they'll never again be able to taste freedom or hurt another innocent person. What are your thoughts on these recently cracked cold cases? Please share them with us in the comments section below. And if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe.